Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Open Dialogue here on Ahlebait TV. I'm here, your host, Fahim Mahomed, an NLP practitioner and qualified life coach. I'm going to be continuing this season discussing social issues as I have private clients that come to me with insight and awareness that most people don't have. I'm going to be using this platform to create further wider awareness on issues that are in our environment today, around us, as well as in our household. So I've invited a number of guests who are experts and professionals to talk and give their insight and awareness. I hope that you are also going to be joining us with the live show, as this is an open call for you to have any questions or comments, so please do call in. Today we're going to be discussing about the topic around how the media portray and represent Muslims and Islam. And I would firstly like to welcome my guest today. We have our scholar, our prominent scholar, Syed Razavi. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. And we have as well today Brother Reza John Vidadi. Thank you so much for joining me. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
So I want to firstly talk about the power of words. Our words are really powerful, and it gives sort of thought to what we are going to represent and what we feel. And I think the media has control over what we think and feel to a certain extent. So we'll start with you, Brother Reza. What is it that you do firstly? Just give us a brief introduction about yourself.
I'm currently doing a PhD, and my PhD examines Muslim representation within Hollywood, so how Hollywood represents Islam and Muslim through the last 40 years in the films that they produce. By studying that, I get to also understand how the media in general represents Muslims.
Okay. So, firstly, do you think that over the last 40 years, things have stayed the same? Do we have the similar representation of, ourselves as Muslims, or do you think it's changed?
Well, history didn't start 40 years ago. History goes back further. So, most important thing is to understand what Muslim identity is from our perspective, and then we can understand and look how the West or Western representation is put together. Muslims who migrated to the West, so from either Asia or Africa or whatever they've migrated from, they have a multiple threads of identity that comes together intersectionally and becomes that person's identity. So a Muslim would have, an individual would have values. If you can imagine, there is like a curtain rail holding loads of threads that come down, and that at the bottom they join. It's that person's personality and identity. So one could be their race, their ethnicity, the value system they believe in, politics, their belief system, spiritual faith. All of these come at the bottom and join. Now, to do with how we see it is different to the way that it's represented in the media in the West. Then we go back further than 40 years. If you look at the way, at the moment, majority of media, mass media in the West, takes its ideology from the colonial oriental system that became prevalent in the last, I would say, 400 to 500 years. So when the Spanish took over the Spanish Iberian Peninsula, and they kicked out the last remaining Muslims or Moors from that area, they caused a genocide by getting rid of all Muslim identity from that area of Europe.
Right.
So either you had to convert to Catholicism, Christianity, or you would have to leave, or you would be executed. That even included Jewish as well as Muslim individuals. So the whole identity of that peninsula that had 700 years of Muslim rulership and Muslim life, and like a metropolitan, it had the biggest university in Europe. It had a whole metropolitan of people of different faith living together, completely eradicated, and this Christian ideology. So when Christopher Columbus, the Spanish took over, the Castilian monarchy took over Spain, Christopher Columbus got the permission, the money and the ships to go to America. he arrived and realized, okay, these are people that we can colonize. He used the same method that they used to clear all the identity from Spain and imposed it onto Caribbean. Then they went to Philippines and they looked at the Philippines. There was Muslims at that time in the Philippines. And they linked these to the Moors. They said these are the same as the Moors. We need to get rid of their identity. So then we come several hundred years forward. The British became the inheritors of the same system that the Spanish used, except they did it on a global scale. British famous for saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire.
Yeah.
So they took that ideology. They went to Australia, to Canada, to the US, to Africa, to Asia, and they eradicated identities of people and imposed their own identities on them. So you would have this hybrid of the British, English gentleman ideology that they had and the, English way of life, imposed it onto other people. Some people resisted, some people didn't. They were wiped out. And so we come now.
When you say that they've tried to wipe out and whatever it may be over the years, that could be to a certain extent. But as we know now, we are ever much increasing. And to be honest, I feel that our media has shown that even if governments and people are not really willing to accept differences, especially try to take away the identities of Muslims, they still have, somehow secretly or continued, if not, evolved and actually spread even wider, even with all of that that's happening in the history.
Are you talking about Western media spreading or the Muslim identity?
The Muslim identity, because even though you're saying that it has, tried to obviously been stopped in the past, we have grown and we have actually spread, and Muslims are the most, spread religion in the world even today.
That's fine, but the issue goes back to when the colonization was imposed on these countries, there was no mass media. It was the media of what the West had, which was newspapers and books. Then as time developed, and as you said, technology developed, and then Muslims traveled, the idea of colonizing either the mind or the knowledge is still there. Why is it that we still have in Western media, be it in the newspaper, TV, or films, any form of media, there's still a sense of a Muslim's presence in that media as a threat?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
There's still a sense of if someone is of a different race, there's something of a threat inside it. But if it's of a white representation within the media, you get all variations. You get the good, you get the middle, you get the bad. But when it comes to the ethnic minorities, or you get the Muslims, majority is negative. And there's so many researches is done. Anyone can go online. Even recently in the elections for the British Parliament and the British leadership, there was clear indications of racism and bias against groups.
So Syed, can you maybe give us maybe a reason as to why especially our Muslims are looked upon as a threat, especially to the Western society, as even today? I mean, we are living where we come from peace. We are very still strong in our faith. Do you think that's the threat? What is really the threat?
Well, I mean, to the Western society, anyone, not only Muslim, anyone who is willing to disclose the truth would be looked as a threat. For example, if you look at the history of Muslims or history of humankind, we have always been victims of the way incidents have been narrated and reported. For example, the divisions between the sects and the problems that had happened between the nations were all dependent on I would call it the social media of the time. The way the social media of the time reported and narrated events, it developed into a different kind of ideology. So West has established their own way and norms of life in the society, by spreading their own word. And when Muslims or anyone who goes against them, they feel and they count them as a threat. So of course they would not want their word to be promoted, and that's why recently we are witnessing a lot of false flag operations emerging, because they cannot defeat the truth, so they are instead depending on creating more false flag operations. So the lie is repeated and repeated and becomes a kind of established way of life or truth in the society.
I mean, I know there is a current obsession in the mainstream media, sort of like pertaining Islam in the West to be tinged with negative signifiers, predominantly like Muslims generally being violent, fanatical, and extremist and terrorism and things like that, even whether it's in movies, in games, and even when things do happen, we're never given the chance to show, even if we do stand out against it. The media is controlled to only sort of show what they want to show. And that's the problem, because they're only giving one-sided view. But I think because technology has developed, we have got the internet, we've got other forms of getting information. So even if people are in the mainstream watching this, I think nowadays they're not going to be totally just only on that sort of way of looking at media, because it's open to other channels like how we have today, for example, or just even on YouTube where people are talking. And the media is spread, even though it's a bad thing for certain extreme reasons, but I think in one way it allows platforms to come on which they wouldn't normally on the mainstream channel. And I think that's what gives even more power to the minorities, especially coming from our background, to show that we do not represent the small majority of people that they seem to portray as the mainstream. Because at the end of the day, I'm looking at certain studies even just last year, I think only like quite a huge amount of British population, like 64%, they only know of Muslims through the media. And that is quite worrying, because the media, what they're portraying is not an understanding. They don't really have an understanding. Or do you think they actually have an understanding as to the way in which they represent Muslims? And is there some sort of like reason or agenda behind why we represent it in this way?
Well, some research that was done before in America by Lebanese Christian professor Jack Shaheen, and he looked at how Arabs were represented in Hollywood and TV. Mm-hmm. And when he interviewed TV producers and directors, they didn't have any relationship with Muslims, so they based it on what they saw on the media.
Mainstream, yes.
Or they based it on ideas and cliches and stereotypes that they had. So there's multiple issues. One is, do we have enough Muslims who are active within media? Mm-hmm. That also faces a problem, because the doors are closed, so those people who are not in the same ideology as those in power, even though they're Muslim, their doors might not be open to them.
Absolutely.
Joaquin Phoenix, who won the Best BAFTA actor, he gave his whole speech a couple of days ago, Sunday, just saying that we, as in the white majority, have not opened doors for minorities and people of color to be able to come and make changes. Because the person who has not experienced what a person of color or of different religion cannot cannot accurately represent those people's perspectives. So you have to enable them to come in and represent themselves. So there's that issue of not letting them in. Why are they not being let in?
Why do you think they're not letting them in?
Well, this all goes back to that colonial white supremacy, Eurocentric mentality. And that Eurocentric mentality, which then went to America, as America came from Europe, basically dominates the world. It's also controlled by various other aspects. One of it is flow of money, so capitalism. Another one is the foreign policy. If you look how media, so the TV news of, say, Sky and BBC and all of these mainstream news outlets, how they represent foreign countries are very much in line with the way the British government or the American government sees those countries.
Yes.
So there's no independent questioning of our governments. A lot of people say, oh, but our press is free, our news is free. It's not really free. And when you go back to the platforms that you mentioned, like YouTube and Facebook, those are also designed in a way where they will not really promote channels which are questioning the authorities.
Definitely,
They promote the more mainstream, say BBC and Sky, because of the relationship of the owners of those companies that have with the government and the corporations. And they basically want to maintain their hegemonic power and financial control. And if we come in and question that, because Islam advocates for justice, as Syed was saying, if justice is that everyone should be paid fairly, if justice should be administered fairly, if you shouldn't be going around the world bombing countries and killing people and not answering for it, that is a challenge to the Western ideology of its supremacy over the whole world. Because that's how the West unfortunately sees itself. When you study the history of colonialism, they believe they have a right to govern the world. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at how the United States and the rest of Europe go around doing things, especially in the last 2 months.
Exactly, yes.
Saying like, we have a right to do whatever we want because we're the dominant power. And the presidents before, they used to sugarcoat it and say it politely and diplomatically. This current president, he says it. He goes, we're going to keep Iraqi oil because it's ours, or you owe us the money. No one ever said things like that before. Now he openly says it. So when you have this kind of ideology, and the only ideology, so communism couldn't stand against capitalism. The only ideology that can prevent complete domination of the world with this capitalistic neoliberal ideology is Islam. Because Islam has all the complete answers for a social, political, and humanistic, spiritual aspect. That's why they find it hard.
So that's a threat, really.
So that's the threat. So what they try to do is they try to change Islam.
Yes.
They try to change Islam to a watered-down diet version of what Islam is.
Yeah, by using the extreme, the minorities, they're like 0.000 whatever percent out of the billion people that's around the world that are causing the extreme, which is actually in every religion, not just Islam. But now it's been, in the forefront and the mainstream media, because if anyone else was to do it, they're never called out for their religion, their race, or anything like that. It's just the fact they may be mentally ill or whatever. But as soon as it's a Muslim, then they are terrorists, and it's,
within
everyone.
the first 30 minutes.
First 30 minutes, that's what it is. So that, in a way, is quite scary for a world that we're living in, for our new generation as well, because it should be actually, moving forward in times where, if you think about it, when they talk about the morals and the equality and the fairness and the justice, we really do represent that. And I think that if we actually were taking more forestanding places and platforms, do you think that we as Muslims, though, do have some sort of responsibility, even with the backlash, even with not having the doors open for us, that maybe if we were to be more united and have the powers within our Muslim community alone, for us to actually take, a platform to actually confront and be part of the media in a big way, or to counter it, or to challenge it, and have our own. I mean, even these channels, they don't really get the views like what we really should have, and people are not really seeing it. We're not actually getting the advertisement or anything in that way. So what is the responsibility, and what are the things that we should do as Muslims, and especially the leaders that are out there, and the speakers and the ones that are on top? What do we need to do?
Well, as a Muslim, we believe that in the modern language, I would say that promoting in media or via media is an obligation as compulsory as 5 times daily prayers. Because
especially
we believe there are 10 principles that we need to practice. And 2 of them are Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar. And this responsibility is not only of the leaders. Every single individual Muslim has a responsibility to pass the right message through and prevent injustice being done to the society, to associate with the people who do good, and to disassociate ourselves from the wrongdoers. These are the 4 major principles in Islamic teachings that every single individual has to practice. If I miss my 5 times daily prayers, and if I don't do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar or Tawalla or Tabarra, which I give a broader meaning to Tawalla and Tabarra. Tawalla means to associate yourself all the good doers.
Yeah.
And tabarra means to disassociate yourself from any wrongdoer. So as a Muslim, we have an obligation. And if Muslims ignore these 4 principles, they are equally ignoring the 5 times daily prayers.
Wow, that's really powerful, and I hope that this is a live show. Please do call in with any comments or questions that you may have, because it would be nice to hear some of your viewers' points of view as well. So basically, they're trying to, the media on a whole, are trying to take control and give their sort of representation of what it should be to have an identity, and instilling fear with regards to Islam. And even with the headlines of Islamists, it's so different to Islam. It doesn't really represent Islam. And terrorist Muslims, for example, in some of the headlines, I mean, Muslims and terrorism do not really come in, in the same sentence. It does not mix. We do represent peace. We do represent things that are contradictory to the neoliberalism and materialistic policies and things that are actually being promoted today. And like you mentioned with the policies, and it's all about, these things that are happening, and maybe that's why we are a threat, because we actually do come, we definitely do come from a whole sort of way of living, which our laws is for everyone. That's what people don't understand. It's not just for the Muslims. And people who are studying Islam can even see that, how it is impactful for people that are talking about politics and economics and even social aspects of life. So what else do you think that the media are trying to do, and how far do you think they can go before it goes into a place where, do you think that people are actually buying into this now? Should they really buy into this with everything's out there? Media, social media is so wide, and everyone's giving their points of view. As much as it's not being pushed forward in maybe Facebook and things like that, but people should be aware, don't you think?
So before the, say, 9/11, 2001, it was a very clear representation of Muslims where they were either terrorists or they were rich sheikhs who didn't have any common sense, or there were women in desperate need of saving.
Yeah.
And then as time went on and people became more sophisticated, what the Western establishment decided to do is have a new version of representation, as I said, a diet or a watered down representation. So they realized that what are the main things that are strengths of Muslims? Women who wear hijab, people who practice their religion, people who eat halal, people who pray. So they started to target, and people who have issues with the foreign policy of America and Western countries. So they started to target and said, okay, so instead of us showing just Muslims in a bad way, let's be a little bit more sophisticated. Let's show Muslims who are good Muslims as opposed to Muslims who are bad Muslims. So the good Muslim is someone who works for the FBI. The good Muslim is someone who doesn't wear hijab. The good Muslim is someone who has assimilated into American society, married outside of his religion, basically has lost his identity, which we were talking about
Still
earlier,
saying
and has
they're
become
Muslim.
just Muslim by name. So now they push this agenda. So when you have younger generation who don't know their identity, who don't know the strand of their ethnicity, their race,
but also
their
these
political
institutes that are coming across in that way, isn't that dangerous? Because we don't, maybe the younger generation are not aware of these institutes. How would you
that's what they're doing.
recognize?
So they're targeting you in a way where you think it's someone who's coming to give you good
Assistance.
instructions, but it's actually trying to dilute you. And you can start to clearly see it in films. They, for example, produced a film where a girl has issue with her identity, with her Asian Pakistani background, so she doesn't get on with her mom, but she happens to get on with the white guy from her college, and she wears hijab, but she starts to kiss it. All of these things are slowly trying to erode that strong identity of the Muslim woman, of the Muslim man. Try to come to a point where it's easier for them to then, once you're lost the pillars, it's easier for them to take over your mind. And take over
So
the
they're
representation.
creating stories in movies and drama series in order to do this, so that people that are finding it a struggle to conform to the rules,
they'll
in a
adapt
way,
to that
They can
side.
adapt to
Yeah.
that, and that's like, again, you know, like you said, just
I'll
labeled
be
by
accepted.
Muslim.
I'll be accepted
Yeah.
by the society. I won't have the
Wow,
pressure.
that is really, really dangerous.
Very
And a
deep.
lot of people are actually falling to that, especially the newer generation who are still just trying to find their way. I mean, Syed, what would you think now that we have to do for the next generation to keep ourselves strong in our identity and to keep hold of our core values and beliefs? Because a lot of the time, religion is looked as backward, and how can we sort of promote Islam to say that it's not just about it being, there hundreds of years ago, but it still represents today the fairness, the justice for everyone? I mean, are we doing enough, and what can we do?
Yes, I mean, we cannot just sit idly and don't do anything. We have to struggle. We have to struggle and survive by strengthening the media, by strengthening the way we approach, by increasing the knowledge amongst the youngsters and community members, and creating awareness. And if we do that, I can show you that even there are non-Muslims who are hungry to find solutions.
Real solutions,
And if
yeah.
Islam and Muslims can be leaders for them without needing to promote just Islam, as Prophet Muhammad used to say, invite people with your body language, invite people with your, not with your tongue, with your behavior. So we need to work on mainstream. I mean, for example, if we call a demonstration, anti-war demonstration, there are millions more than Muslims who would come and take part.
That's true.
So this shows that people are interested to join with us. All we have to do is not to be afraid of all these false flag operations and join hands with non-Muslims who are thinking in the
same way.
way.
These organizations are happening, and we are rallying against, what should be and what the media is saying that we're not doing. So throughout your dissertation, your studies, what have you sort of concluded with regards to this phenomenal sort of like happenings of media control and polarizing Muslims in a particular way? And is there a solution?
So obviously I've got a few more years to finish my studies, but
No, I'm going to ask you for it now.
but I think that, as Syed has said, basically we have to do is our taklif. So there's this mindset of, well, it's such a big thing, how can I change it?
Yeah.
It's not about what if you can change it or not. Ultimately, we, as Muslims, believe we have to answer for our actions in the hereafter. So if my responsibility falls within the scope of my understanding of educating others, be they graduates, undergraduates, my own community, people online or whatever, I have to make that effort. That's my taklif, that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
To who it will fall on and how it impacts them, that's up to God. I'm not here to make numbers.
take the step.
I'm here to make the effort that I'm responsible for. And if everyone comes in with that perspective of, even if it's a small amount, it'll make a difference. But education is the main thing. If we can educate our youth to understand their identity, their roots. So there's this thing of trying to cut, make them feel ashamed of their roots, be they Asian or African or whatever. You make them understand that they should be proud of their heritage, proud of where they came from. Yes, they may be British or American, but there was a root that brought them there.
Yes.
If you don't know your past, how can you know your future? So that's our own youth, how we work on them. Educating them to see how media is trying to brainwash them. Then you go to the next level, is educating the people outside, like Syed said, who may not be Muslim, but they're on same ideal and same level as as what we're challenging. Because a lot of people who are non-Muslim are starting to see that their mind is trying to be colonized as well by the establishment, and they've had enough of it. But they don't know the tools that are being used, or they don't know how to decipher the coding, so they need to find out how to decode it. So it's about trying to get as much as possible education out, establish the roots that we have, educate the people outside of that community, and then from there on, you'll have so many other people who come up with ideas of how to challenge it. Because there's people, organizations active in America and UK and other places where they're challenging the narrative. We have to create a new narrative. There's stories that you have, there's stories that Syed has, stories that I've had that needs to be told. And until we make that effort of entering art and popular culture, we're always expecting them to tell our stories. And that's when it gets problematic.
So you've done documentaries, I know, and you've done certain movies and things like that. Do you think there should be more people, you know, going into media and journalism as well?
Yeah,
and
I think media and popular culture. So we need people to write, you know, beautiful novels. We need to write people who would create art. We need people who will produce films and music and things like that that will affect people's hearts. Because it's good to have facts. It's good to, like, you know, write a dissertation. But people are more interested in the human aspect, the emotions to be engaged. And so that's where popular culture comes in. So we need people to go into that. Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of dentists and doctors and engineers. That's good.
That's good.
We should maintain
yes.
that, but also we need to start
Venture
affecting
more.
people's hearts as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's so vital, especially in our cultures where, you know, we do have more of a responsibility than we realize. And when we talk about, I know I've brought this up many times, and I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't be, you know, in any sort of medical field, because it's definitely required and it's helped a lot, especially in countries that, you know, don't have that and people have given their time. And I know personally of many medics that have given their time to go and help in these, you know, war-stricken areas and, you know, sort of like developing worlds. But like I said, we do need to have a variety of you know, careers that we're going to get into, and this is another opportunity. But also I feel it's not just the new generation, the older generation are not encouraging their children because they're scared, and they're not educating themselves and bringing themselves up to date because they're worried that if they do not have that high professional financial job, that they are not going to be getting married, they're not going to have the house and the car. So we do need to have a lot of work done in our communities. And I deal with people every day, and it's the same old problems because of the same old issues with the same old mindsets. And it doesn't work. Clearly, it does not work. And people are in jobs even in the most highly professional establishments, and they're really depressed and they've got mental issues because they're not doing what they love, and they're not even, you know, pursuing their real skill and talent. And we are humans here with all types of skills and talents to put forward. And something like this is not just in this life to live so that you can leave a legacy of a house and a car and a business. You need to much more than that, where you're going to actually make a difference. Oh, sorry, we have a Skype call, but this is going to be something totally different, which is slightly off topic, which I should have announced at the beginning. But yes, we have Sister Uzma online, who is actually, it's actually one of the people that are taking the initiative to actually create some sort of foundation for Muslims, especially the youth and adults as well, by creating a platform for students and individuals online to learn in accordance to the Ahlebait. So I'll let Sister Uzma, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So can you please tell us about Club 313? This is a new initiative that you, the founder, have set up, and we need to obviously have an awareness of this because it's really beneficial to all our new generation and also people to remind ourselves. Please, you know, go ahead and explain, what does this mean? Club 313.
So firstly, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come online and talk to you, to talk to yourself and explain to your audiences what it is that we're trying to achieve, inshallah. So thank you so much for that. So just to give you a very brief kind of overview of what we're trying to achieve, the vision of Club 313 is that all the youth in our community have a confident, strong and a mindful personality, and they have the skills that they need to assist the Imam of our time, inshallah. And we do this by understanding the challenges our youth face on a day-to-day basis, and we try to create as many opportunities as possible to help them achieve and excel their potential. And this program and project that we're currently working on at the moment looks at many different sort of a snapshot of every area within a youth's life, and we are trying to develop them in every area, inshallah. So trying to help them and support them and guide them so that they can be this holistic person who can go out there and be themselves and be strong and confident in the societies that they belong to.
Perfect. I mean, it's actually
So
quite in line
I just want to introduce, this is a long-awaited, a brand new youth empowerment program that we've been working on behind the scenes for quite a while. And it's basically to identify, we've kind of identified an opportunity where I myself, if I talk about my own kind of experience of how I came about doing this, was that I've got children who are sort of teenagers, and everything, all the good programs and initiatives that were happening, usually most of the time they take place down south. So in London primarily, all of the like youth initiatives are, I know they're spreading all over the UK now, alhamdulillah, it's really, really good to see, but primarily most of them take place in London and surrounding areas.
Yes.
So it's really difficult for people from other cities to, take part in those or help their youth or their kids to take. I mean, it's just not realistic to drive like a 4-hour journey to get to a 2-hour program and then 4 hours back is just not practical. So I was thinking about how do we help other youth or my children to begin with. That's how we started, to help them also get the same kind of programs and initiatives that are happening in other parts of the country, for them to actually also have them here, where I live, which is further up north. So initially, we created a youth club here in Sheffield, which is where I live, and so alhamdulillah, we have an up and running youth club here. But once we had that, the initiative was that we have sort of more of a club that's running, some leaning more towards like a fun element. So we have 3 weeks of them, every Sunday, 3 weeks in a month where they're just having a really good time. They're getting together, they're making friends. The boys are going out to play football. We have different activities for the girls, and actually just get them to mingle and meet each other. And then on the last Sunday of the month, we would call a scholar and choose a topic that we've chosen for our community. And then they would talk about that and have a workshop, an interactive workshop. So that worked really well, and that's still ongoing. And alhamdulillah, that's been really, really successful. We started off with just a few boys to begin with, and then eventually, the whole community kind of got involved, including the parents, which was wonderful to see, and obviously shows that there is a need, and parents are absolutely desperate for something to happen in different areas. But once this was established, I still thought about what about other kids in other places? Like, there are still so many different places in the UK and other places around the world, particularly the Western countries, where there just isn't anything going on for the youth. And I think that's kind of a tragedy if you think about it, really, because if you think about two different youths, one, let's say, born in London, and another one happens to be born in a different part of the country where there isn't anything happening, any initiatives for especially Shia youth,
Yes.
the two children will be brought up in a completely different way, in a completely different environment. And of course, everything kind of begins with the tarbiyah that you have at home. Of course, that's really, really important. But your environment in terms of your community makes a major difference in who you become and how you, what kind of decisions you make and what kind of friends you make, and how your life turns out, really. So that is something that I thought about a lot, and it was something that I wanted to do something about, but it took a while for me to think about where are all the youth. I was studying in the Islamic College of London, doing masters in Islamic studies, and one of my essays I based on this particular, I did a lot of research on what the reason is that our youth are really disengaged from the Husseinias.
Yeah.
What are the primary reasons that they don't want to be attached to something so phenomenal? Like the story of Hussein is so moving that you get people from other faiths who are just desperate to know more about it. But our own youth who just, who are born into this, aren't really that interested, aren't showing that much of an interest. So that was something that I looked a lot into, and I kind of did a massive survey where we had, the parents answering, the youth themselves answering, the madrasa teachers. We had the youth organizations involved, and lots of different angles to look at this subject and really dig deep into what the reasons are. And of course, there were lots and lots of reasons that came up, and prominently, one of them was obviously the language barrier, but there was other things like the subjects that are being talked about on the pulpit are just not relatable. They're not things that are that are happening in our lives right now. There were other things like, in some cases, the adults or the older people who are running the idaras aren't really allowing the youth to take initiatives and make changes. Either change worries them, or for whatever reason, they're not letting them or allowing them kind of take the initiative and do what it is that's necessary to make the change and make it more contemporary. Not to change the religion in any way, shape, or form, but just to kind of make it more adaptable so that it's relatable for the youth. So out of that, studies, obviously lots of research came out, and then obviously looking at where the youth are, we find all of them online. So that's where we thought about how to kind of bring this together and create something that we can serve our communities wherever they are. It doesn't matter where you're born, you should have access to services like this everywhere. It should be easy for the parents, it should be easy for the youth to get involved in things like that. So the platform that we've created online, it allows the opportunities to personally interact with the scholars or professionals directly through the courses that we've built and designed. And there are times at the end of the sessions where for members to ask questions. So it's a very interactive environment. And they basically dig deep down into each area within a youth's lives. So we've identified many different areas, and this is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you a very brief overview of what kind of things we're covering.
We can be brief, please, because we've only got a minute.
So we have. Sorry, I'm going on.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're looking at emotional development, we're looking at physical development, professional development, spiritual development, cognitive development, and social development, and these areas are further broken down. And then we have 6 to 8 weeks of program really looking deeply into that subject and making sure that our youth are really aware of everything within that subject, and then they go through each of the programs.
So if any one of our audience wants to get in touch and be a member as well as join your interactive online learning, can you tell me how do we contact and how do they do that?
Yes, so we have a website which is www.club313.org, and to contact us, you can send an email to us, which is contact@club313.org. Our website will give you all the different details that you need on how to become a member. We've kept the fees really low to make it easy. It's only £3.13, sticking with the number, special number of 313. So it's a monthly standing order of £3.13 to become a member. And then obviously there is a fee attached to joining the programs, but we've tried to keep that as low as possible as well, so that parents. But the other special thing about this is that this is not a program only for the youth. So obviously the youth get involved in this, and they have the, let's say it's a 6 weeks program, they do the 5 weeks one-on-one with the trainer. And then the 6th week is where the parents are also joining the session, the last session, where they get an overview of what the kids have learnt, and tips and techniques, and sort of breakdown of how they can support their child and implement the learning that they've done. Because there's no point in teaching the kids if we can't help them and support them, change their environment so that they can actually implement what they've been learning.
Thank you so much, Sister Uzma. Inshallah, we wish you well with the initiative, and hopefully if anyone wants to contact you, please do so. And hopefully we will have you back online. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Take care.
So that's Club 313. It's kind of fitting with what we're talking about today, because we want to increase online and representation, and maybe we can even use it like as part of media to actually create awareness to youth wherever they're going. So it's a really good initiative, and I thank you so much, Sister Uzma, for even coming up with this and taking the initiative by yourself and actually having this out there for especially our youth today, as well as adults. Actually, there is a program for adults as well, and it's talking about different areas. And even one of the maybe topics, maybe they could actually have is about your identity and learning, because they've got scholars from around the world doing these kind of talks and programs. So inshallah, please go online and please check out Club 313 for yourself and your family members, so that we can be part of this initiative and to increase ourselves in our learning. So thank you so much. But before we end, can we just quickly have maybe some last words before we end this? Because we know we have talked in a very broad sense, but it is quite important that we just get maybe a few sentences, like less than a minute takeaway from this. Syed, can we start with you?
As I mentioned during the program, we should not ignore Amr bil Ma'ruf, Nahy anil Munkar, Tawalla and Tabarra, and use it in its broader meaning. Don't close our mind and restrict it to some historical events.
Yes.
Tawalla means to associate yourself with good doers and disassociate yourself from the wrongdoers. And there are plenty of good doers in this time and age. We should associate with them and disassociate ourselves from wrongdoers. And it's a responsibility and duty and obligation for every individual, as Brother Razavi mentioned. According to whatever you know, you have an obligation to pass it on.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And Brother Reza, can you tell us something?
I think Syed summed it up really well. I would just say go and read the history of the British Empire, history of colonization, history of Islamophobia. There's many books you can get access to. And from there, build the basis on how to go forward to challenge these kind of like enemies.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming and your time, and I know you've just traveled as well, and thank you so much, Syed. Salaam alaikum. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you, Sister Uzma, as well, for joining in as the last minute. It is just an example, a small example, Club 313, that people are taking initiative. They are making a difference. They're using the online platform as a representation of how we need to move forward. And that sort of gives us an idea that it is possible for each and every individual to take on the responsibility to make a difference, even if it's for our own family members in our households, and taking it towards our community and society and on a broader platform. I hope, inshallah, that we had greater awareness and insight from the information here, and we will be back next week with another guest and a new topic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.